Well, we did it. We made it all the way through our very first season of The Last of Us. I cannot believe this show became a reality. I'm very glad it aired. I'm very glad that it came true so that many people across the globe could experience the great story that takes place between Joel and Ellie. And while I have been seeing a little bit of mixed reception over the finale, it does seem like most people enjoyed it. And you know what? I am glad that they did. But now that part one is over, we can move on to the totally non-controversial part two, which is known for being super tame, super calm, and not boundary pushing at all. Okay, so the finale, that's what you're here for. That's what you want to talk about. So let's talk about it. I think firstly, we should address Neil Druckmann and the production crew and thank them for putting together a really good show. And while it wasn't exactly perfect or how I would have handled things, I think for the type of audience it was targeting, it did a pretty decent job, especially in the first half of the season. However, the more I think about how things have ended up from episodes 7 through 9, so the last 3, I can't help but feel a bit unsatisfied with the direction of how things went. Just before number 7 was about to air, I actually played part 1 DLC for the first time in my whole life, and I realized something very important, at least to me. Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley had stumbled upon a formula that worked perfectly for this story and world building. And the first time they really deviated from this formula was in this DLC from all those years ago. You see, most of us, or at least I do, tend to look at The Last of Us as a tale of Joel and Ellie's relationship, which it certainly is. But it is also a story about dangerous raiders, infected, and the journey of perseverance through it all. And while I was playing the DLC, I was confused because I love Ellie. I love her story arc. I love the world that The Last of Us has created, but for some reason, I just wasn't really feeling that tug at my heartstrings like I normally do, and I was ultimately uninterested. Later that night, I watched episode 7, and I felt the exact same way I did while I was playing that DLC an hour or so earlier. And then it hit me. The formula was broken. There is a true recipe for The Last of Us, and it's my belief that if it's altered in any way, it can really negatively impact the experience. And listen, I understand you might feel differently, and this isn't me dumping all over the show or the game. It's just something that I kind of personally realized over the last few weeks. And this begs the question, what is this formula or recipe that I'm talking about? Well, simply put, it's a tale of balance where all pillars of the story impact one another equally, or at least enough to create stakes and tension. The Last of Us has, for the most part, been one of the best balancing acts of its kind over the last decade in American media. And I think its story can be simplified into 4 main components. Number 1, Joel and Ellie and their developing relationship. Number 2, the overarching narrative of keeping Ellie safe to save the world with her condition. Number 3, infected, because they are the source of all this tension and drama and just anguish. Number 4, interactions with dangerous people, because everybody behaves differently in a survivor's world. And when any one of these ingredients is picked apart or over or underindulged, it changes the recipe for better or worse. Inside of the game, I understand there is more time to flush out certain narrative elements, whether it's through gameplay, a cutscene, or just downtime through passive chit-chat, but there are key moments of fighting infected where our characters thrive and become closer because of their survival, which in turn brings Joel and Ellie's relationship closer, making the stakes higher of getting her to the final destination safely. You see, without infected, there is no Ellie's journey. Without Ellie's journey, there's no Joel and Ellie's relationship. Without their bond, there's nothing to break by other people interfering, and around we go. And it's not that I think HBO's rendition of the story is necessarily bad. I just think I would have done things a little bit differently. So before we move on to the finale itself, I would just like to briefly touch upon episodes 7 and 8 because I do feel like they're pertinent in how episode 9 was portrayed. So during the build up to the finale, I really felt like the production team left out so much of that formula that makes The Last of Us, well, The Last of Us. Throughout the season, there were remnants of breaking away from Joel and Ellie, like Bill and Frank's episode, which is a fine piece of cinematic artistry, but as far as focusing on our main story, it really did deviate from that core recipe. It felt like the producers really got things back on track with episodes 4 through 6. Not to mention, it felt like the show had found its voice and was taking creative liberties in all the right places, as HBO was keeping true to the balance of Joel and Ellie and their journey, defending themselves against infected in navigating through obstacles of crazy people. But once we made it to episode 7, it felt like a completely different show. The tonality was really altered, in my opinion. And while the experience at the mall was important to tell the audience, as it is the moment Ellie realizes she is immune, there is a strong disconnect as to why she is having those memories in the first place. And it's to no one's surprise, it's because of Joel. You see, inside of the game, after Joel gets stabbed, Ellie ventures to a nearby mall to find medical supplies, and in doing so, she has flashbacks to her and Riley getting infected together. And I don't want to forget to mention that Ellie also has to defend herself against more of those men that attacked her and Joel just moments before at the university. And all of that is missing from the show, and in my opinion, cheapens the reasoning as to why Ellie thinks and feels the way she does. Not to mention, it lowers the stakes as to what happens in the next episode. And with episode 8, things were better, I suppose, but again, the absence of Joel for a majority of the episode, it really felt like the Ellie show again, or maybe it was the villain David's episode. It was a little bit hard to tell. That being said, the scene where Joel tortures those two men in order to find Ellie, the chef's kiss, man, that was so good. That is a great moment of being true to the game while also sticking to that formula that makes the story so brilliant. Anyways, I digress. Inside of the game, the reason that David is so drawn to Ellie is due to the fact that she killed so many of his men at the university where Joel gets injured, and at the mall when she is trying to get medical supplies like I alluded to before. Not to mention, after the deer incident, they survive a whole bout of infected that shows David how resilient Ellie really is. Whereas in the show, he just is kind of taking a liking to her just because, I don't know, it's never really explained. And then the writers added a whole romantic aspect, and I say this in heavy air quotes for YouTube friendliness, and truly, I thought that was ultimately unfitting, especially when you have no other context than Joel and Ellie killed one of David's men versus in the game where you kill dozens. Towards the end of episode 8, when David attacks Ellie during the final scene, he is apparently trying to sexually assault her while the building is burning, while his finger is broken, while he had just been stabbed in the gut after he has been bitten by her, and it all felt so over the top, and it really kind of pushed me away to what I think is one of the greatest moments in the game, which I was also hoping to be one of the greatest moments in the show or of the season. I think it also annoyed me particularly because the show boasts itself for being realistic, and then it just does like weird shit like that. And I don't know, it was such a pivotal moment in the game, and it really diminishes it to like a cartoonish power fantasy for the writers. I don't know, I just really wasn't vibing with it. Not to mention, when Ellie is smashing David's face in with the machete, and rightfully so, Joel is supposed to grab her to have her stop from emotionally spiraling, to save her, to comfort her, to teach her how to draw her emotional boundaries, to control that rage. But instead, he just casually bumps into her outside and they just run off into the sunset. Listen, I am fine not getting everything I want in a piece of media. I truly am. I understand that we can't have a show with like all these gunfights and infected sleuthing all over the place. The budget probably doesn't allow for all of that, but it is part of the formula, and it is a huge part of the reason why these people do the things that they do. And listen, these last 3 episodes, they weren't bad. It just felt like the writers missed the little details that make this story so important, like understanding why Ellie is thinking about Riley, or the amount of violence that took place to make David and the cannibals seek out Joel and Ellie, or when David and Ellie survive a horde of infected together, building this bond of hate and respect over time through this trauma. Or hey, maybe it's just creative differences in my head, and I just can't be certain about that. But again, when this formula is imbalanced, it leads to an unnatural pacing in the story, with a tendency to make things feel like a clip show or a best of highlight reel. When I saw the runtime for the final episode, I knew that corners were going to be cut. 45 minutes to tell the final moments of season 1. It really felt unjustified to our characters and the story that had been told. And again, this episode strayed from The Last of Us core ideology by removing infected from the equation, but it did add in a new scene to the show that I think was great and would have been awesome in the game. The opening sequence was a woman running full speed in the woods and finally arriving at this abandoned house where she enters to hide from a infected person. While all the commotion is occurring, you learn that she is pregnant and also in labor. It now clicks into your head that this is supposed to be Ellie's mom, and Ellie is about to be born, as this is Ellie's voice actress from the actual game. And they did this a lot through the show. It was a really great addition. Like Marlene was actually played by herself. Kathleen's gunman is actually the voice actor that plays Tommy. And I'm not sure if anybody else was in the show, but there was about 3 of them that I can remember. Anyways, Ellie's mother's name is Anna, and she is having contractions, and an infected bursts through the door, attacking her as she is giving birth, which was just fucking wild. I love this scene. It was very intense. And as we all knew, the little baby was Ellie. We see that Anna is bitten, and she cuts the umbilical cord quickly, but not quick enough because Ellie gets just enough of those cordyceps in her blood and brain to create that immunity response. Shortly after, Marlene and some of the other soldiers come looking for Anna, and they find her and Ellie in the second floor bedroom. Anna convinces Marlene to take Ellie, gives Marlene the switchblade that is so iconic from the game and the show, and she wants her to give it to Ellie when she gets older, and she asks Marlene to kill her so that she doesn't turn. And a few moments pass, Marlene hands Ellie over to one of the other soldiers and says, "Cover her ears." Marlene shoots Anna, killing Ellie's mother while she is only a few hours old. This was a very awesome, badass, and creative scene, and I think for the most part, the show did an excellent job of taking these creative liberties throughout the season. We then pivot back to Joel and Ellie, who really are having some intense heart-to-heart moments over the next 15 to 20 minutes. Ellie is clearly in deep thought about what happens after they get to the hospital, and Joel is starting to look at Ellie as more of a daughter figure. And they are both really struggling to find the words to tell one another that they care for each other, but they do so in these convoluted roundabout methods, which is perfect for how they are as individuals who just bottle everything up tightly. Fortunately, and I'm very glad they included this in the show, we were able to see the giraffe sequence, and while it was a bit poorly done, as a lot of the CGI in the show is just kind of crap, I thought they handled it well by giving Ellie yet another brief moment of normalcy inside of this fucked up world, especially right before she is about to go into a traumatic surgery, or so we think. The look on Joel's face as he sees Ellie being happy brings him this moment of peace as he thinks maybe this will work out and they can be sort of a family or whatever that could be for them. After the giraffe encounter, Ellie and Joel continue on and they end up inside some tunnels. Now, in the game, Joel and Ellie find a whole bunch of infected, some bloaters, and then there is a whole sequence of Joel getting stuck underwater in a bus, and that whole scene was just gone, which was a very big letdown for me. Now, let me be clear. I didn't expect there to be some grandiose bus flood, but I was expecting there to be maybe some more infected for them to muster through. I don't know. It all felt so easy. The best part about the flooding scene in the game is that Ellie ends up unconscious from being underwater, and Joel is trying to save her life, giving her CPR while the fireflies have an AR pointed at his head. None of that content was present, which lowers the stakes considerably from where I'm sitting. Now, the production team at HBO fucking nailed the ending moments of the show. I don't think I could have asked for a better implementation. Once Joel wakes up in the hospital and confronts Marlene, there is a new tension present that doesn't occur in the game. Now that we know Marlene was there when Ellie was born and we have actually seen it and we saw her kill Ellie's mother, I mean, that makes that moment between Joel and Marlene that much more intense, and I both hated and respected Marlene at the same time, which is very consistent with the duality of human behavior and emotion presented throughout this story. Joel is, of course, devastated when he finds out that they have to kill Ellie in order to extract the chemical compounds that may or may not save the world. And as Joel is getting escorted by the guards, he kills them and fights his way to the operating room in order to save Ellie from her demise, or perhaps from saving the world. While carrying her to the car, he bumps into Marlene, who is bargaining with Joel in order to convince him that she could be the key to saving humanity. They argue over the concept of choice and how Joel is taking that choice away from Ellie. However, the Fireflies and Marlene weren't honest with Ellie either. They didn't tell her that she was going to die in order to give this cure out to the world, a cure that may not even happen. So there is a lot at play here, and it seems like none of it was up to Ellie. But how much understanding does a 14-year-old have about the way the world works? But I suppose that those are the elements The Last of Us wants us to think about. After Joel and Marlene discuss things, Joel kills her in cold blood, drives Ellie back to Jackson to live with Tommy on their commune. Ellie wakes up in the car and Joel tells her a lie about what had just occurred. Before they arrive at Jackson, their car breaks down and they have to walk on foot to the remaining distance, and it's clear that Ellie is in some sort of distress. She eventually confronts Joel right before they get to town, making him promise that everything went down exactly how he had told her in the car, that the Fireflies had essentially stopped looking for a cure and that she was no longer needed, along with the fact that there was a raid that killed everybody in the building, including Marlene. Joel looks Ellie dead in the eyes and he says, "I promise." After everything that Joel and Ellie have been through, they are starting anew with their relationship on a lie. And any relationship that starts on a lie, it's just a terrible bedrock and it cannot support itself. This sets us up for the next season to see how Joel and Ellie live in Jackson, along with everything that Abby and her crew have to offer. It is going to be a wild ride. There is no doubt about that. Before I wrap up here, I just want to make sure that you understand, I don't hate the show. I was just a little let down. I guess I just expected more, and this isn't to say that any one person did a terrible job. I think I would have just done things differently if I had the time, the camera, and a budget. I think that it was a satisfying finale as far as a television show goes, but when comparing it to the game, the last few episodes just had so much to be desired. I really feel like HBO just strayed too far from that core formula that makes the game so special. Tensions that arise from surviving infected allow character development in a different way other than simply just spending time together or overcoming a human obstacle. But even though there was a lack of infected moments, I still enjoyed my time. The thing is, this story is about two people going through emotional turmoil who are very distraught and ultimately surrogates for one another. There is a lot here that is timeless, but the reasons for these things occurring is what's important. That how and that why are what drive the story. And I think it's a bit reductive to just blindly hate the show and say that the producers didn't bring anything to the table. It's just from where I'm sitting, it wasn't as strong as it could be. I have heard many times that this story is about broken people who do broken things because of the circumstances that they are in. The show aims to do that, and I would argue even did that at one point. However, where the series began and where it ended up, things tonally felt so much different, almost like the writers and directors didn't know what made this story so special. You can't have Joel without Ellie. You can't have Ellie without Joel. You can't have survivors without a broken world, and you can't have that world and a story without infected. All of these plot points are the pillars that prop up this narrative that we love, and by the end of the show, things barely felt like we were fighting for a cure, but fighting to keep the story being told for the fourth time. The more that time has gone by, the more I look forward to season 2. I think there's going to be a ton of controversy, tons of speculation about the show, and I look forward to seeing what creative liberties Neil Druckmann and HBO will take as they bring to life one of the most controversial games ever made. However, I really want to know what you guys think in the comments down below. There's no need to be rude. I know this community is super passionate, but we're just talking here. It's all good. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace out, everybody.